Hello, my name is John Sebesta, and I'm the editor of the UN Chronicle, the online magazine of the United Nations. This is Chronicle Conversations. I'm very pleased and honored to welcome to the UN TV studios today Ambassador William vanden Heuvel. Ambassador William vanden Heuvel is an attorney, author, and former diplomat. He served at the United Nations Embassy in Bangkok, Thailand, from 1953 to 1954. In 1962, he was appointed assistant to U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, and he was involved in Kennedy's 1964 and 1968 political campaigns. He served as United States Ambassador to the European Office of the United Nations in Geneva from 1977 to 1979, UNOG, and as United States Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations here, I guess, right, from 1979 to 1981. Since 1984, Ambassador vanden Heuvel has been chairman of the Roosevelt Institute, and he is a current member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is governor and former chairman of the United Nations Association of the United States of America, and he has written extensively on the United Nations and American foreign policy, of course. So welcome, Ambassador. I'm so pleased to meet you and to have you here with us today, and I know I'm very lucky to have you here. It took a lot of doing. How are you doing today?
I'm delighted to be back in the UN. There's a sense of tranquility here that's absent the rest of the world.
Wow. Wait till you get back outside. You came very early, so
right.
something might be going on here. So you know a lot about the legacy of the United Nations. You're chairman of the Roosevelt Institute?
Chair and founder.
And founder. So he was very influential in the founding of this
Franklin
place.
Roosevelt was the greatest president of the United States in the 20th century.
I agree.
think historians generally acknowledge that fact. On January 6, 1941, which was still 11 months before Pearl Harbor and the United States was not in the war, he gave one of the famous speeches of that era to the Congress. And in it, he outlined what was going to happen in the war, the terrible destruction, the anguish, the ruthlessness of war. And he indicated that it only could be justified, if at all, by the world we left after it. This war had to be won so that we could create a world that would prevent it ever recurring again. The Four Freedoms speech, where he said, in that world, all nations must be guided by the principles of the four freedoms: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Margaret Thatcher called it one of the great speeches of the 20th century. 11 months later, we were at war. All through the war, Roosevelt guided the working on the peace, what was going to follow it. So it wasn't like the League of Nations erupting with the arrival of an American, but he had guided everybody to understand what had to be done. And the last year of his life, 1945, he made the trip to Yalta to convince the Russians to be part of the United Nations. He got the British to agree to it. They created the Security Council, set it all up. 2 weeks before the charter was open to public view of 1945, President Roosevelt died. The greatest memorial to Franklin Roosevelt and to Eleanor Roosevelt, who carried on for many years the great commitment to the United Nations that the Roosevelt name represents. That coming together has to be remembered today. We have to go back and remember what we were all about.
Well, this is the 75th anniversary of the United Nations coming up in the fall. And so it's very appropriate to talk about all of this. And
well, I had hoped in the 75th anniversary, beginning in 5 years ago, I made my tour of the UN offices, urging them to declare 5 years as the year of peace, and not just have a celebratory occasion where there isn't, frankly, very much to celebrate, but rather to set a challenge to the 193 members of the United Nations and say the 75th anniversary is going to be the recollection of what we did, but you tell us as a nation, as a people, as an individual, what it is that you've done in this 5-year span to enhance the possibilities of peace. We are entering one of the most dangerous periods in the history of the world, because part of it is that weapons now are practically costless. The cyber age, for example, is going to change the nature of war. What is the drone?
Oh, it's the drone strikes.
The drone.
Yeah.
The drone strikes.
Mm-hmm.
The drones are inexpensive, available to anybody. You can buy them at Amazon.
Right.
And here you are using them to do some of the most belligerent and decisive acts of war.
Yes.
So the time is at hand where the UN again has to play the cardinal role.
Mm-hmm.
And in that period of time, we have to remember why we formed it, what its purposes are, and to remember the words of the Charter, we the peoples, not the governments, we the peoples of the United Nations, set out to create this organization to prevent the scourge of war that has devastated generations to come.
Mm-hmm.
That's the task of the United Nations. I realize the limitations on it.
Mm-hmm.
The United Nations is a great group. People I've worked with are the best in the world. But the problem is governments control the United Nations.
It's 193 bosses.
And that makes it very, very difficult for the UN to come forth and assert it. But that's the challenge to us. And I had hoped that this anniversary year would be used by every element of the United Nations, beginning with the founders, beginning with the peoples of the world, going to the government to find a way to make the Security Council more effective and to make the challenge of war the greatest single challenge that we face and conquer.
So you're here today, actually, you've touched on this, for a conference on no more war, or say no to war. I'm sorry, what's the...
I'm here to honor Cora Rubin, who is one of the great heroes of anti-war.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to urge her and all of those who've committed so much of their lives to disarmament, to understand disarmament is no longer the issue. Stopping war is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
All of us must hang our heads in shame and sadness that a war like Syria can be carried on with 600,000 people killed and with hardly a person in the world who can tell you what that war is about. We've got to find a way to stop the war. And in the process of stopping the war, we will gain time to reorganize ourselves as a world, hopefully, so that the arms control problem can be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
But the immediate problem to be dealt with, and one that can be dealt with, is the prevention of war.
So do you think that preventing war has a lot to do with social and economic situations, or is it just purely at the political level?
Well, I mean, basically those elements and those problems are part of what you have to deal with in the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
And the United Nations does an extraordinary job in the fields of development and the fields of new nations. So, but I mean, I think that what we have to deal with is the political problem of not allowing war. Syria is a perfect problem. I mean, here we were dealing with the volatile embers of fire in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody the United States had not played a great role with Syria for the years before that.
That's right.
President Carter had made a very persuasive case for not doing it now.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think there's 3 or 4 major opportunities in the past 5 or 6 years that we've missed as a world,
mm-hmm.
as an organization, as countries, that could have prevented this absolute disaster of humanity. You know, we've learned to say never again when we look back and see the horrors of the Holocaust, the worst crime in the history of mankind. But we have to understand that with the horrors of the Holocaust in mind, all of us have allowed a war to take place with over 600,000 people killed, with daily pictures of children in anguish, with people starving to death, and we've seemed to be unable to stop that. We've got to be able to stop that, because wars can't be won anymore. You don't win war.
There's nothing to win.
There's nothing to win. You've got to stop war. And it's the stopping of war that Cora and others have done so, have committed their lives to, and they deserve. They've been lone voices out in the desert. Mm-hmm. Countries have, moved on as though the arms control is meaningless. It hasn't been meaningless, but we are, for the first time, at a time where weaponry is available almost to everybody, mm-hmm. and will be much worse. I'm saying this as words of warning.
This is just the beginning, right?
This is just the beginning. And the nuclear clock that began in 1945 is closer to midnight, say the scientists of the world, than ever before.
Right.
So the greatest things we could do in the 75th anniversary is to give the United Nations a new responsibility, or a continuing responsibility, said better, but with empowerment and with persuasive powers to really prevent and stop war.
So you believe that in order to live up to Roosevelt's legacy here at the United Nations, and the whole place is imbued with his legacy, that countries really need to focus on war as a first priority.
Yeah, I think the Security Council especially.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the permanent members of the Security Council have a special responsibility. Roosevelt didn't intend the Security Council to be sitting there monitoring and observing what was happening in the world. It was supposed to be the decisive element of power that would intervene to stop the recurrence of war that we had just finished in World War II. And I think that the permanent members of the Security Council have an overwhelming obligation to find compromise in their hearts and souls, to permit the rest of mankind to live at peace. And if we can stop war, then we can begin to deal very effectively with all of the other elements, the climate control time, the cyber age. We are living at a time that is a greater revolutionary time than the Industrial Revolution.
So as dangerous as technology is in terms of
It's
drones,
hopeful.
and there is a hopeful side to it. There's a positive side if we're willing to invest in that and look
I've
at that.
just published a book called Hope in History, trying to show the events in the last 60, 70 years that I had a familiarity with, to show how the greatness of our nation, I write it as an American, the willingness of our world to create a better world. That's what each generation has to make that commitment.
I want to thank Ambassador vanden Heuvel for being with us today. Believe me, his time is very tight, and we are honored and very lucky to have him here today. Just wanted to say thank you to UNTV for the use of their facilities today, and look forward to having another Chronicle Conversation soon. Thank you.